The man Oduduwa is generally regarded as the progenitor of the Yoruba race, but there is a lot of him that is shrouded in mystery. First of all, who is this man? In fact, what does the name mean? The name Oduduwa. Where did he come from? From Mecca? This episode is going to be addressing those questions, particularly the argument of Oduduwa or the Yoruba race as a whole being sourced or having their origin in Mecca. How true or false that is, we are going to be trying to find out in this episode. But first of all, it is very important to establish that the origin of the Yoruba people, just like the origin of every other nation, is shrouded in a lot of obscurity. The account of the early history of most nations on this planet Earth is always purely legendary or just mythical. Now, that being said, it is generally claimed that the Yoruba sprung from one particular Lamurudu in Mecca, one of the kings in Mecca actually, who had Oduduwa as one of his sons. This Oduduwa then becomes the direct ancestor of the Yoruba race. This is how the story goes, or one of the stories, because there are many stories. But let me share this one, the most popular one. Oduduwa was one of the princes in Mecca, a crown prince actually, being the first son of Lamurudu. The period of Lamurudu's reign is yet unknown in history, but this is what happened. Oduduwa was an idol worshipper and he had a great influence. He's got a lot of followers. He had an agenda of converting that nation to his own ways. He wanted to make the religion of the Orisha the state religion, and he had a priest who was also an artist, an image maker. This used to be the one who carved his idols for him. But here comes the twist. This Ashara, the priest of Oduduwa, had a son called Brahma. This son was an unapologetic Mohammedan, a Muslim, and he abhorred all that his father did. He hated anything that had to do with idols, just like any typical Muslim. It then happened one day that Brahma took advantage of his father's and Oduduwa's absence and destroyed all the gods found in the temple. He destroyed all the deities with an axe and then spared one. He hung the axe on the one that is spared. When this was discovered and he was asked what happened, he scornfully replied them by saying he didn't know. Maybe they should ask this remaining god why he has chosen to destroy the rest, since it was on his neck that you have found the axe. And to mock them further, he asked them, or can't he talk? And then he said, why do you worship a god who can't talk? Which is basically the most popular questions Muslims or Christians ask animists. The long and short of the whole story is that this led to a civil war. It became a war between the Muslims and the animists. But the Muslims were more than the animists. Lamurudu the king was slain in this war. He was killed because, according to the Muslims, he enabled his son, and Oduduwa, being overpowered, ran away. He fled. He traveled 90 days from Mecca, wandering all over the place until he set foot on a place called Ile-Ife, where he met Agboniregun, the founder of Ifa worship. He was well received by Agboniregun, and the beliefs of Agboniregun actually tallied with his. It was in this Ile-Ife that Oduduwa settled. He married more wives here. He had a son called Okombi, who became the father of Oromiyan and his siblings, the founders of Yoruba towns and cities. That is the popular story that we have been told. Now, before we argue on how false or true that story is, let it be established that we really can never know. Apart from the fact that there is no written evidence to back up this story, just like the story of the start of every nation, there is usually no written evidence to back up the stories. But apart from that, we can't even find evidences from archaeology. And in any case, the versions are just too much. There are so many stories, many accounts, many narratives, many traditions. Again, I reiterate that the origin of the Yoruba is shrouded in mystery and obscurity. The English people, for instance, have their own story of King Arthur and Camelot, which is purely mythological. In those stories, you read of unicorns, you read of dragons, and a lot of monsters. All of these are fictional characters. All of these are not real. Just as Oduduwa has a lot of mythical stories around his personalities. If you go to Ile-Ife, you would even find Oduduwa being worshipped as a deity, as an Orisha. But one thing is sure, however, whoever we are, We did not come from here. We have not always been here. In other words, we are not natives of this place. There are no natives anywhere in the world. Everybody came from one place. Everybody migrated from one place. But in the case of the Yoruba, we couldn't have migrated from Mecca. It just doesn't make sense on so many levels. We can safely arrive at that conclusion by just juggling and juxtaposing some facts. Since the Yoruba race is black, for instance, then it is only commonsensical that our progenitor, our ancestor, must have been a black man, just like you and I. And if Oduduwa was black, then it couldn't have been an Arabian at the same time. Only black people have this kind of skin anywhere in the world. Wherever you find a black person, just know that the origin of that person is Africa. That is why we call this place Ile Adulawo. Arabians are not black people. So how did the ancestor of one of the largest black races in the world be an Arabian? Also, traces of error are very obvious in that story. Apart from the fact that the word Oduduwa has no meaning in the Arabic language, there is not one single evidence in the history of Arabs themselves to support that claim that such an event took place. If an event as pivotal of one of the king's son, one of the sons of Lamurudu Oduduwa, being exiled on the basis of being an idol worshipper, then at least one of the writers, one of their historians would have documented it. Not one single evidence in history to back that claim. But at the same time, we can't discard that story totally like that, because a lot of our scholars have done a hard work of connecting our roots with the Middle East. One such scholar is the legendary Modupe Oduyoyi. And also over here, I've got books with titles such as The Yorubas Are the Original Jews. This one says the scattering and future gathering of the Hebrews and how it reveals their true identity. This one says 50 cultural similarities between the ancient Hebrews and the Yorubas. And over here we've got the original lineage of the Semitic Hebrews, that is the Yorubas. Now, my sentiment regarding these scholars and their works is that most of the scholars would like to connect our roots with either the Jews or the Mecca story. Most of them are always either Muslims or Christians. These are people whose religion makes them believe that this place is a very special place. Christians believe that the Jews are the chosen of the Lord. Muslim believes in Mecca as the holiest place that exists. So could it have been the case that these scholars are just desperate to have their own people, the Yorubas, connected with this special place of the Lord, these Jehovah's or Allah's abode? Does the belief that we are related with the Jews do something on their esteem? Does it make them more proud to be Yoruba? Are they doing this to fulfill some kind of religious desire or to be historically accurate? This is just my own subjective opinion, however. What cannot be doubted, as you will find out in those books, is the fact that there are ample evidences of our connection with the East. But let me conclude that there is also a tradition that argues that we are from Egypt, the Nubians. Let me read to you from this book, The History of the Yorubas by Samuel Johnson. It says here, again, that they migrated, talking about the Yoruba, that they migrated from Upper Egypt to Ile-Ife may also be proved by those sculptures commonly known as the Ife marbles. Several of it may be seen in Ile-Ife to this day, said to be the handiwork of early ancestors of the Yoruba. They are altogether Egyptian in form. The most notable of them is known as Okpa Oromiyan, that is Oromion's staff, an obelisk standing on the site of Oromion's supposed grave, having characters cut in it which suggest a Phoenician origin. 3 or 4 of these sculptures may now be seen in the Egyptian courts of the British Museum, showing at a glance that they are among kindred works of art. I leave you to ponder on that and to keep asking questions, to keep finding out, because like I said, we can never really be certain of our origin, and it's just very peaceful to accept that. But a more interesting question is to be answered, and that very urgently. The term Yoruba that is being attributed to us today, what does it mean? Where did it come from? Washiri.